Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Bienvenue pour ce nouveau rendez-vous de Penser le présent. Ce soir, on est plus que ravis d'avoir avec nous Simon Starling. Ne soyez pas surpris et surprises, mon intro est en français. Simon parle, en tout cas comprend le français, et puis la rencontre se déroulera en anglais. Mais pour nous plonger un peu dans son univers, je vais faire l'introduction en français. Donc il y aura un petit switch à un moment donné. J'aimerais simplement commencer cette présentation, qui sera rapide, n'ayez pas peur, en évoquant votre exposition personnelle, Simon Starling, qui a eu lieu en 2009 en France, au Macval et au Parc Saint-Léger. Elle a joué l'effet d'un détonateur, d'une véritable prise de conscience de ce qu'était à ce moment-là le tournant numérique qui se jouait à cette époque-là, et de la mutation technologique qui était en train d'être à l'œuvre. Je pense que dans l'auditoire, je ne suis pas la seule. Je vois le visage de Nicolas Giraud, je vois d'autres personnes de ma génération. Je ne suis pas la seule, je pense, à avoir eu cet effet détonateur dans cette exposition qui se déroulait sur 2 sites. L'exposition, elle avait un titre prometteur. There, here, then there. Le tout attaché. Là, ici, ensuite, là. L'idée n'est pas de faire l'exégèse de cette exposition, mais je crois que ce titre, en tout cas, résume bien, ou en tout cas invoque bien l'esprit de Simon Starling, un art des pérégrinations, un art du déplacement, un art de la circonvolution et de la boucle. C'était aussi une entrée dans votre processus de travail, un art du démantèlement de la chaîne de production d'une œuvre, ce que vous appelez en anglais « the nuts and bolts of art making », dans un entretien avec Francesco Manacorda. En effet, votre travail interroge les rouages de l'art. Vous aimez bien traquer les choses à leur source. Vous les faites aussi souvent dérailler par une série de circonvolutions avant de retomber, je vais être un peu familière, mais de retomber sur vos pieds. Dans votre travail, l'œuvre d'art n'est jamais hors sol, mais elle est prise dans un contexte économique, technique, esthétique. Et c'est extrêmement important, je pense, encore plus aujourd'hui, avec un auditoire plein de jeunes artistes pour qui toutes ces préoccupations sont plus que vivaces. On en a eu encore un exemple cet après-midi. C'est autour d'histoires matérielles que nous allons dériver ce soir, comme vous pouvez le voir derrière moi, au cours de cette rencontre. Les minerais de platine, d'argent, qui sont bien sûr liés à l'histoire de la photographie, mais aussi à l'histoire de l'industrie, se sont bien souvent et à plusieurs reprises retrouvés au cœur même du processus de fabrication de vos œuvres. En 2005, je ne vais pas être très longue, mais vous gagnez le célèbre Turner Prize avec une œuvre qui a fait date, One Ton 2, de cette mine d'extraction du minerai de platine en Afrique du Sud. À partir de l'image, vous réalisez à partir de la prise de vue, vous réalisez 5 tirages au platine qui, à partir d'une tonne de minerai, vous réalisez la quantité que la tonne de minerai permet de tirer. Donc il y a un rapport d'échelle forcément extrêmement fort entre 1 tonne et 5 tirages. On voit déjà les enjeux économiques, écologiques qui étaient à l'œuvre dans ce travail en 2005. Je citais cette exposition au Macval en 2009 en introduction tout à l'heure, et je pense à une installation qui a été quand même extrêmement marquante, qui s'appelait Silver Particle After Henry Moore, et où vous n'hésitiez pas à découper la matière de l'image. Je pense qu'on y reviendra un petit peu ce soir. Un vintage, ça vous fait pas peur de le couper, de l'altérer? Et c'est des processus que vous avez pu explorer dans d'autres installations comme de Nanjing Particles, sur laquelle on va revenir ce soir, qui a eu lieu au Mas Moquin en 2008. il y a, je ne sais pas si vous appréciez le terme, mais en tout cas une dimension alchimique à certaines de vos œuvres. L'argent, la matière emblématique de l'image photographique, peut parfois muter en bronze, matière emblématique de la sculpture, quitte à en passer par les technologies de pointe. Et Silver Particle en était un exemple parfait. Extraire de la matière d'un tirage, extraire un minerai des sols, extraire de la valeur d'un objet sont des processus que vous avez explorés dans une œuvre qui prend justement en compte ces processus de fabrication et ces relations, comme je le disais, économiques, esthétiques ou idéologiques qui sont associées. Bienvenue Simon Starling aux Beaux-Arts de Paris. On est très 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 heureux et heureuse de vous entendre ce soir. Je voulais simplement signaler une actualité également sur laquelle vous reviendrez, je pense. Vous avez actuellement une exposition au Kunstmuseum de Winterthur autour de la figure du peintre allemand du 19e siècle Adolf Menzel, mais pas que. Mais en tout cas, c'est le dénominateur commun de cette exposition. Et je pense qu'on y reviendra aussi ce soir. La parole est à vous. Bienvenue aux Beaux-Arts de Paris, Simon Starling. Merci d'être avec nous.
Thank you. Thank you for the... Oh, can you... Is it working? Okay. No. Is it turned on? Oh yeah, there we are. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you for leaving the beautiful spring evening and coming into the dark cave with me. But I'm going to start to sort of, I don't know, wake us all up. I'm going to start by showing a very short film with a kind of raucous soundtrack. So we'll start with that, and I'm afraid I have my PowerPoint is a little dysfunctional, so I have to jump in and out of it to show the film. But bear with me. amateur. As the title of the talk suggests, my aim today is to address my work through the idea of material histories, which you might understand most simply as the relationship between people and things. I hope to do that by focusing on a number of recent exhibitions, as well as, in turn, by thinking about collaboration, which for me has been a vital source and force in the making of some of my most ambitious projects. My collaborators are often placed front and center, becoming protagonists in an unfolding drama of an art practice that has persistently attempted to interrogate its own making. The film that you have just watched, Wilhelm Noack, OHG, is an early example of a work that puts my collaborators to the fore, and that typically is a work that interrogates its own making. When exhibited, an elegant loop machine built with the help of a company of Berlin-based metal fabricators, Wilhelm Noack, the subject of the film, carries the 400 feet of 35mm film up and through a projector, transforming the still images that we see moving around the spiral staircase-like structure into moving images projected on the wall that somehow tell the story of both the history of the company and the development of the loop machine itself in a 4-minute-long bumping and grinding heavy metal roller coaster ride through the company's workshops and archives. I considered myself to be an artist for whom at least 50% of my practice is determined by exhibition making. Yes, I make artworks, but those artworks only come to life when exhibited, when they find a context, be it an existing set of parameters in a specific location. A Berlin gallery in a former industrial building was the perfect setting for Wilhelm Noack, OHG. Or in conversation as one of a number of works within an exhibition constellation, be it in a monographic or a group exhibition. In the past few years, I have made a number of exhibitions with a somewhat retrospective gaze, an attempt perhaps to reclaim or recoup past works and to rethink them in light of current concerns and approaches, and to do that in a way that they generate new works, new connections, and most importantly, new possibilities for exhibiting. On location, one of the essays in Barry Lopez's book, Embrace Fearlessly the Burning World, culminates with a beautiful boat image, which was in part the inspiration for a recent collection of boat works assembled in 2 venues in the English Lake District. Lopez writes, "To survive what's heading our way, global climate disruption, a new pandemic, additional authoritarian governments, and to endure, we will have to stretch our imaginations. We will need to trust each other, because today it's as if every safe place has melted into the sameness of water. We are searching for the boats we forgot to build." It's a bit slow, sorry. Boatworks saw many of my boat-related projects made for specific sites and in specific land and seascapes find new sparring partners, new conversations, and a new sense of focus. The exhibition included a proposal for a hybrid bike boat designed to navigate the length of the Po River from the source to the sea for another upcoming exhibition. It also included Blue Boat Black, a project realized on a residency in Marseille in 1997, which took the form of a convoluted act of unsustainable provision, a disused museum display case from the National Museum of Scotland, Edinburgh, was transported to Marseille and resurrected temporarily, at least, in the form of a small fishing boat, a traditional bark. The reconfigured vitrine was then put to sea and used to fish in the waters around Marseille. When several fish had been caught, the boat was then further transformed into charcoal in order that the catch might be cooked and consumed. Coming full circle, the boat returned to the museological realm in the form of a charred remains, testament to the cycle of construction and destruction, use and reuse. Blue Boat Black represents an out and back approach, museum, world, museum, not uncommon in my practice, a museum vitrine put to sea and returned, transformed to the museum. Another project in Boat Works, Project for a Rift Valley Crossing, 2015 to 17, was represented in the exhibition in the form of a film. Project for a Rift Valley Crossing was made in response to a very particular landscape, a deeply complex landscape with an intensely divisive history, a fast disappearing and highly saline body of water at the lowest point on Earth, sandwiched between Israel, Jordan, and the occupied West Bank, a repository for vast mineral wealth, once fed by what was formerly one of the world's great waterways, the Jordan River, now a mere trickle, its fresh water diverted for intensive agriculture long before it reaches the Dead Sea. It is a dystopian vision of long-term environmental degradation fueled by cultural history and politics. Its ever-expanding shoreline is pitted with sinkholes that sporadically consume farms, roads, and buildings as the environmentally stressed former seabed collapses in on itself. I'm going to show the beginning of a short film project for a Rift Valley crossing, which documents an attempted crossing of the Dead Sea on the 30th of November 2016, using a boat made from magnesium produced from Dead Sea water. The film, accompanied by a paddling song written by Chicago-based musician Josh Abrams, ends as the boat slowly disappears into the mist, as if magically melding back into the sea from which it came, as an extended list of credits appears, as long as the film itself, that mark the complex network of craftspeople and manufacturers, drone operators and cinematographers, military and governmental authorities, etc., that made the project possible. So again, I have to, quit my PowerPoint and find the film. Here we are. Oops, seems to be halfway through for some reason. Okay, here we go. Boom. Here is the musician Joshua Abrams, whose music you've just been listening to, as presented in my recent exhibition at the Kunstmuseum Winterthur. Josh's torso and neck are formed from a gwimbri, a North African bass lute that he plays with his band, Natural Information Society. The Winterthur exhibition was entitled "The Artist Wearing a Mask of Adolf Menzel Holds Plaster Casts of the Ambidextrous German Painter's Left and Right Hands and Other Interventions," and nods to its trans-historical collaborative nature. This series of interventions into the wonderfully rich collections of the Kunstmuseum Winterthur addresses the museum and its collections in the company of some of my colleagues and collaborators. Brought along with a number of existing and new works to lend their interests and expertise to proceedings, my so-called time team includes the marine biologist Sam Bowser. Dr. Sam Bowser, born 1957, is a polar biologist and explorer, specializing in the study of foraminifera, or forams, unicellular creatures that build intricate shell architectures from the calcium carbonate they collect while drifting through the sea. The earliest known references to forams comes from Herodotus in 430 BC, who noted that them as making up the rock that forms the Great Pyramid of Giza. Today, forams, organisms that have played a crucial role in marine environments for over 5 million years, have become a key to understanding the effects of climate change. Bowser's study of these ancient creatures led to numerous expeditions to the Antarctic. He spent many summers in Explorers Cove and nearby Cape Benacci, studying Antarctic tree forams, tiny architects noted for their constructions of intricate submarine trees, and has contributed immensely to our knowledge of their biology, ecology, and diversity. He has a new genus of forams named after him, Bowseria arctowski. I first came to know of Sam Bowser through Werner Herzog's documentary, Encounters at the End of the World. Herzog filmed Bowser diving in the timeless and horribly violent world below the Antarctic ice, and then at night watching vintage sci-fi films in his remote research station. Later that year, I met Bowser at the Wadsworth Center in Albany, New York, while developing what was to become the Nanjing Particles, a site-specific work made for nearby Massamoka in North Adams, Massachusetts. Bowser, who throughout his career has been active in collaborations between the arts and the sciences, worked with me and a 3-story-high million-volt electron microscope to produce 3-dimensional models of 2 silver particles, tiny image fragments from a historical stereo photograph of the Chinese migrant workers in 19th century North Adams. That's the image you just saw there, blown up. Radically enlarged to 1 million times their original size, these models were subsequently transformed into highly polished stainless steel sculptures by a skilled team of metal workers in Nanjing, China. The more they polished, the less their work was visible, and the more they saw themselves. So this is the work installed at Massamoka. which is a beautiful old textile printing building. Another of my time team, the conservator Sherry Phillips, was a key collaborator in the making of Infestation piece, Muscled More, 2006 to 2008. Infestation piece, Muscled More, conflates two seemingly unconnected stories into a single sculpture, orchestrating a collision between the politics of both art history and the environment. To create the artwork, a steel copy of Henry Moore's Warrior with Shield, 1953 to 54, was immersed for 18 months in Lake Ontario. The submerged sculpture, a brutish, life-sized male figure with severed limbs that evolved from the form of a pebble Moore found on an English beach, was colonized by thousands of zebra mussels, a non-native invasive species introduced into the Great Lakes in the bilge water of trading ships from the Black Sea at the end of the Cold War. Following its first showing at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery in Toronto on the shores of Lake Ontario, in my monographic exhibition Cuttings Supplement 2008, Infestation piece Muscled More was acquired by the AGO and put on display alongside some Henry Moore originals. A minor institutional crisis ensued when the sculpture triggered an infestation of clothes moths, attracted to traces of dried muscle flesh still present on the surface, which, as you can imagine, is a museum's worst nightmare. Co-opting the role of the dramaturg from theatre, a catalyst for developing performances through conversation and inquiry, Sherry Phillips took on the active role in shaping the final stages of the post-production of the sculpture, working with and against time, and in a constant negotiation with growth and decay. Phillips undertook to clean and stabilize the surface of the work, enhancing its aesthetic qualities, while crucially allowing it an institutional future. Infestation piece, Muscled More, is typical of my attempts to repurpose and reimagine existing artworks to contemporary ends. An endeavor highlighted in Tim Ingold's description of the work in his book, Making, from 2013, describing this transformation thus: as Henry Moore himself acknowledged, the figure has sunk into the solitude and paralysis of its own pain, solidly impervious to its environs. It belongs to another place and another time, as though caught in a battle fought thousands of years ago. On the lake bed, however, the figure has effectively been turned inside out. Underwater, the surface in which it was once encased has become a substrate for life and growth. Through the muscles that infest the surface, the figure seems to protrude itself into the surroundings, literally oozing from every pore, as though opened up from the inside. It is of our time and place. Already on entering the Kunstmuseum's lobby, we are greeted by the work from which the exhibition as a whole gets its title. The artist, wearing a mask of Adolf Menzel, holds plaster casts of the ambidextrous German painter's left and right hands. As one of a number of portrait figures integrated into the museum's permanent collection, this standing figure establishes a spirit of cross-generational collaboration and homage. As its title suggests, the sculpture depicts the artist, me, an abstracted and rusted steel figure, with a mask of the long-dead Adolf von Menzel, 1815 to 1905, hung around my neck. The low-hanging mask is a reference to the height of the 137-centimeter tall German painter. I gently clutch plaster casts of Menzel's hands in my own leather-clad hands. These casts, taken during Menzel's lifetime and reproduced by Berlin's Gipsformerei, were originally made to in celebration of his ambidextrous abilities. His preferred carpentry pencil in one hand, his paintbrush in the other. Later in the exhibition, in a room that simultaneously houses a number of von Menzel's so-called private paintings, along with the work of his contemporaries, we come across my Ritterstrasse 43, a work that is now in the Kunstmuseum's collection. Partially obscuring the view from the gallery windows and held above the floor on scaffolding poles is a hugely enlarged facsimile of a once tiny painting, Adolf von Menzel's Berlin Tenements in the Snow from 1847, magnified in every detail, every painterly lump and bump enlarged, every woodworm hole in its now flamboyant frame 10 times its original size. This reproduction of Menzel's modest oil sketch can also be seen across the space in a photograph that hangs from 2 steel cables, an echo and scale shift that reverberates across the room and through time. This image was made at Ritterstrasse 43 in Berlin, where Menzel painted the original in 1847. The view from his bedroom window now radically altered by 20th century apartment building and city planning. Both space and time are conflated and confused in this photographic return to source. The huge sculptural facsimile being returned to its modest print, in this modest print, to its original size. Behind this suspended image of a suspended image is a 1-to-1 scale wallpaper image of the original Berlin Tenements painting alongside 3 other oil sketches by Menzel. Returned to source, this black and white wallpaper now sits in front of the original paintings, and while the huge facsimile allows us seemingly unprecedented intimacy with Menzel's tiny masterpiece, the humble original remains partially buried under layers of transformation, reproduction, geographical displacement, and historical obfuscation. In an adjacent period room, along with a collection of Menzel's drawings of hands, another painting made by von Menzel's apartment, The Artist's Bedroom in Ritterstrasse, 1847, appears in the form of a 75-to-1 scale enlargement of an installation view of a salon hang of von Menzel's work reproduced in a catalogue. On closer inspection, we realize that each printer's halftone dot has been substituted by a carefully selected black pushpin. 32,000 of these variously sized pins now make up this laboriously reconstructed image. Labor that is seemingly negated in the tiny photographic reproduction of the pinboard painting that faces it from across the space, once again returned to its original size. This is, like the project as a whole, very much a lockdown artwork, a product of the refashioned timeframes of the COVID pandemic. Across the lobby, in a gallery exhibiting some of the earliest depictions of glaciers, some made at the end of the 17th century, when the Alps remained a frightening and largely unexplored place, we find 1 Ton 3, another out and back project, you might say. 1 Ton 3 takes as its starting point an image of the source of the Morteratsch Glacier, made in 1879 by the Swiss photographer and mountaineer Jules Beck. Now housed at the Swiss Alpine Museum, this image of the celebrated but fast disappearing glacier has been progressively retouched and then printed in a series of 5 unique platinum palladium prints. Each, step by step, returned the image to its original dirt and dust-free, pristine state. These contemporary reprints of Jules Beck's image of the glacier were returned to the Upper Engadine, the home of the glacier, following a 4-day-long, low-carbon journey of 318 kilometers from its contemporary source, the museum archive in Bern. This is near Lake, where is that? Oh, I can't remember now. And then moving through the Alps and the pass down to the valley of the Engadine, the Upper Engadine. On arrival in Zuoz, the trailer of the purpose-built hybrid transport display system developed specifically for the nationwide exhibition Watch the Glaciers Disappear was upended and extended, creating a space to exhibit the 5 prints of the 19th century original. One of a series of works made in the past 15 years that relate traditional forms of photographic image making to their raw materials, 1 ton 3 utilizes a quantity of platinum group metals, conflating the photographic with the sculptural. The realization of the 5 prints of Jules Beck's mortar arch image necessitated the extraction of 1 ton of ore from a platinum mine. This image is part of a precursor to 1 ton 2, one of the 5 platinum prints of a platinum mine in South Africa. On the wall opposite, we find Caspar Wolff's The Lower Grindwald Glacier, 1774, a sci-fi-like depiction of the little understood creature ever so slowly creeping down the valley towards the artist. Here, I'm reminded of a passage by Robert Macfarlane's book Underland. Macfarlane writes so beautifully about the material history of ice. I'm just going to read a little bit. Ice has a memory. It remembers in detail, and it remembers for 1,000,000 years or more. Ice remembers forest fires and rising seas. Ice remembers the chemical composition of the air around the start of the last ice age, 110,000 years ago. It remembers how many days of sunshine fell upon it in the summer 50,000 years ago. It remembers the temperature in the clouds at the moment of snowfall early in the Holocene. It remembers the explosions of Tambora in 1815, Laki in 1783, Mount St. Helens in 1842, and Kuea in 1453. It remembers the smelting boom of the Romans, and it remembers the lethal quantities of lead that were present in petrol in the decades after the Second World War. It remembers and it tells. It tells us that we live on a fickle planet, capable of swift shifts and rapid reversals. Ice has a memory, and the color of that memory is blue, the blue of time. Although Caspar Wolff's glacier is more green, I would say. The subtitle of the sculptural assemblage 9 feet later, a cacophony of material histories, shown here in a room of German Romantic paintings with a deeply retrospective gaze, reads, 9 feet of zigzag chair designed by Gerhard Rietveld in 1934 and reproduced in 45,910-year-old swamp kauri wood by Andrew Miller. a 9-foot-long 3D printed copy of a birch branch produced in methacrylate over a period of 69 hours, 47 minutes and 27 seconds. A telescope housing for a 9-foot-long focal-length Newtonian reflecting telescope built in oak by Willie Love. 9 feet of 25 million-year-old petrified wood. A 9-foot-long painting of bamboo made on Japanese cedar veneer by Toru Okada and Takahashi Furukawa. Another work that also featured in Boatworks, Houseboat for Hoe, 1:10 scale model, with its apparently grinning facade, was shown at the Kunstmuseum. Face to face with a similarly thatched rural dwelling portrayed in Peter van Sandvoort's dynamic dune landscapes with farmhouses from 1620. It is perhaps interesting to note that the English word landscape comes from the Dutch word landschap, a genre of painting of rural scenes with signs of human habitation, just like this one. Houseboat for Hoe was developed in response to an invitation to make a public work in the village of Hoe on the west coast of Denmark, a low-lying village in an area that is directly threatened by climate change-induced sea level rise. Houseboat for Hoe is a hybrid structure built between the 15th of August and the 10th of October 2023, using related but geographically remote ancient technologies, collapsing two material histories, South American reed boat building and European thatching. Torn between the land and the sea, this prophetic ark-like vessel, the result of a cross-cultural collaboration, now sits in anticipation of an uncertain future. This is another of my collaborators, Giorgio Griffa, who just turned 90, with whom I have made a recent two-person show in Turin entitled D1 to D5. Back in, did I miss a slide there? Sorry. No. Back in 2017, I made a small photo essay and accompanying text about Giorgio's very particular practice for Frieze magazine. The text read, "This visual essay is a continuation of a collaboration with the Turin-based painter Giorgio Griffa that began last year following the discovery of a very particular brush at an urushi lacquer workshop in Wajima, Japan. 5 centimeters wide, with a flat wooden handle. The brush is the key tool employed in the critical final coat of lacquer in this painstaking and seemingly anachronistic process still used for coating tableware and furniture, and is crucially made from the hair of Japanese women pearl divers, the ama. I purchased one of these brushes and was, for some time, trying to find a way to activate this highly evocative object in a work. I found the idea of making marks with the brush daunting, but in May last year, I found myself sitting with Giorgio at a dinner to celebrate his participation in the Venice Biennale, and realized there and then that I should ask him to collaborate on the work. There seemed to be something in the nature of the brush that related to his measured yet exuberant and often calligraphic mark-making. His generous response consisted of 3 cipher-like ink-on-paper works, organized within a grid of folds that led, in turn, to a series of similar gridded annotations on my part, annotations that reconnected that very particular tool to its origins. When I arrived with my 8x10 plate camera to photograph his studio in late December last year, I found a small trestle table sitting in the middle of the main space with a pile of neatly folded canvases on it. Giorgio has used exclusively unstretched, unprimed pieces of canvas, burlap, and linen as supports for his paintings since the mid-70s. This modest pile of no more than 30 centimeters in height was, I was told, the entirety of his upcoming solo exhibition at Camden Arts Centre, London. In this folded form, the paintings assert a quiet materiality with their varied tones of white, cream, and brown textiles, often frayed at the edges. Even when hung simply with pins along the top edge, they retain much of that sense of being objects, as well as images that exist resolutely in time and space. Even the camera's gridded ground glass focusing screen seemed to echo his paintings' structuring folds. The resulting images are, I hope, a celebration of a lean economy and subtle materiality of Giorgio's practice. So that was the text that I wrote to accompany the photographs that I've just been showing you. These are his mixing bowls, which are actually very thin plastic bowls that he's been mixing paint in for 30 or 40 years. So they're about, 3 centimeters thick or something now. And that's his archive of past works. Late last year, following the establishment of an exhibition space below Giorgio's studio, Fondazione Giorgio Griffa, I was invited to make a 2-person exhibition with Giorgio. We conceived the exhibition as a dialogue between our 2 very different practices and used a series of collaborative works made with and around that fabled Japanese brush as a starting point. We wrote an accompanying dialogue for the exhibition, Giorgio with his pithy, precise sentences, and me with my more convoluted formulations. Giorgio begins by writing in relation to the painting Disordine P.O. 2025. That's the painting you see up there on the left. The first cell that multiplied at the beginning of life was an act of disorder in the previous order, and so on until it became fish, ants, elephants. I responded in relation to head to toe, something of an exquisite corpse of a work, a composite collaborator embodied. So this was my response to Giorgio's comment. Head to toe is a quiet cacophony of small disorders, an echo chamber of material and dimensional mutations. Tree resin becomes black lacquer. The trunk from which the resin came is cut to the height of the craftsman who, using a brush made from the hair of a Japanese ama pearl diver, applied that black lacquer to the vitrine. The lacquered vitrine now contains a gold bar. The gold bar has been stretched to the length of the tree trunk and radiates in the light from a handmade bulb. The bulb's tungsten filament, also the length of the stretched gold bar, the tree trunk, and that craftsman, illuminates the craftsman's now oddly heavy tungsten sandals. Gold colors glass red, and so on. Making is embodied, head to toe. Giorgio also made an exuberant new text painting based on the title of another of my works, also featured in Boat Works, Autoxylopyrocycloboros, a work that involves an entropic voyage in a steamboat that slowly consumes itself until the inevitable happens. The letters in Giorgio's painting seem to rise up from the depths like champagne bubbles? Or are they sinking? I'm not sure. Here, Giorgio's painting Bianco dopo Bianco from 1981 hangs next to As He Buffs, a work I made with and about an Urushi lacquer master from Wajima, Japan. Just like the Chinese metalworkers in Nanjing, the harder he works, the more clearly he sees his reflection in the polished black lacquer in front of him. Again, the two bulbs have filaments as long as both the craftsman, Masahiko, and me. Oh, sorry. Sorry, it's a lot of words and they're all English. I apologize. The Sorcerer's Apprentices, a scenario for a conversation, was a recent collaboration with fellow artist and photographer Ulrik Heltoff. Ulrik runs the photographic department in the Danish Art Academy and is a knowledgeable enthusiast for the early development of the medium. Consisting of two large-scale printed panels with cut-out head holes, 5 red mops and a publication, The Sorcerer's Apprentices overlays iconic images of brooms from the very earliest days of photography. William Henry Fox Talbot's The Soliloquy of the Broom from 1841 and The Open Door from 1844, onto both the animated magic brooms from Walt Disney's early color classic Fantasia and that film's source, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's 1797 poem, Die Zauberling, the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Made at Fox Talbot's home, Laycock Abbey, Wiltshire, The Open Door is a refined remake of the less known earlier image, The Soliloquy of the Broom. Significantly, these broom images were made on paper negatives, which, unlike the daguerreotypes that preceded them in the development of photography, allowed for an unlimited copying of a single image. An army of broom images could now proliferate from a single broom negative. While both photographs have their roots in pre-photographic images of brooms, particularly those from the 17th century Dutch genre painting that had already validated the everyday as a viable subject for the artist, they can also be understood as the beginnings of a broom in a doorway photographic trope that can be tracked throughout the subsequent history of the medium. Oh, I've lost my cursor. Is my cursor up there? Oh, yeah. Sorry. Here it is. Good. As far from a single image, the broom prop in The Open Door and The Soliloquy of the Broom appears repeatedly in Fox Talbot's work from the 1840s, at the entrance to Laycock Abbey, first leaning one way, then the other, among some tools propped against a garden wall or leant against the wheel of a cart. The broom becomes a leitmotif for Fox Talbot, a signature of sorts, the embodiment even of one of photographer's founding fathers. The photographer as an artist, an artistic new broom sweeping away the preconditions of image making with his so-called pencil of nature. This scenario for a conversation is brought into focus in the exhibition through two larger-than-life reproductions of The Soliloquy of the Broom and The Open Door, installed in the doorway that separates two parts of the exhibition space, Bonomatic. These reproductions include head holes that transform the images into so-called comic foregrounds, a popular entertainment of the type common in fairgrounds and seaside resorts throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. These comic foregrounds allowed people the emancipatory magic of being photographed, transformed, finely attired, lavishly muscled, animal-bodied, or even decapitated, transported to exotic locations, or simply restaged in the everyday. The resulting images that memorialize the act of being represented itself can now be understood as a telling glimpse into the contours of our own contemporary experience of image proliferation and hyper-reality. In the script to be performed by 2 actors, the 2 broom characters act out a number of scenes. One broom performs Goethe's The Sorcerer's Apprentice, the inspiration for Disney's animated brooms. The other soliloquizes his anxieties about the relationship with his younger and more celebrated broom sibling. Together, the 2 brooms embody a moment of cognitive collapse at the beginning of the internet, the so-called Sorcerer's Apprentice syndrome, an uncontrolled proliferation of data triggered by miscommunication between a source and a destination. They get into the heads of the Italian painter Caravaggio on the run from a murder rap and his studio assistant Cecco as they reimagine the biblical story of David and the decapitated Goliath. They imagine a twilight meeting between the ghost of a long-dead samurai warlord and a rogue warrior turtle, war turtle, from an augmented reality. They stage a meeting between one of Fox Talbot's 19th century brooms and the 20th century mop in Jeff Wall's The Volunteer. They enact a key early conversation, originally a written correspondence between Fox Talbot and the botanist Sir William Hooker that pitched Talbot's lens-based pencil of nature against the actual pencil of a traditional botanical illustrator. At all the time, the 2 brooms worry about their own genesis as images and try to come to terms with the significance of the moment when 1 broom image became 2, and so on. They attempt to reconcile their individuality, their sense of self, with their existence as images in the age of mechanical reproduction. The last exhibition, and indeed collaboration, that I will talk about today was an exhibition made at Casey Kaplan Gallery in 2023 in collaboration with another Danish artist, Emil Ron Andersen. I have worked with Emil, who's involved with cutting-edge image production technology in his work as both an artist and a commercial photographer on a number of projects. In 2014-15, he was involved in Pictures for an Exhibition, an attempt to reconstruct 2 installation views from a 1927 exhibition of Constantine Brancusi's sculptures at the Arts Club of Chicago, a hybrid process involving 2 Chicago-built 8x10 Deardorff plate cameras. So you can see we printed an outline of the installation views on the back of the glass screen so that we could then go around North America and Europe to re-photograph all of those sculptures back in the exact position that they'd been in the original. Visits to 14 different museums and private collections in Europe and the United States, and a complex layering of scanned negatives to recomposite the original installation views of this constellation of sculptures. This image-making process was accompanied by a deep dive into the provenance history of each of the featured sculptures and a subsequent set of provenance images that connect the sculptures to their various owners, past and present. Here we see a piece of medieval armor owned by Ronald S. Lauder, who also owns Brancusi's carved wooden head, the chief, which is the sculpture you saw here in this photograph. So that's Ronald Lauder's living room superimposed onto the living room of one of the founders of Microsoft, who owns Bird in Space now. Here are a few of the 36 images that constitute pictures for an exhibition hung in a later installation of the work. Following that project, I was invited to Minneapolis to develop an exhibition with the then curator of photography at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. The discovery in Minneapolis of a second copy of Brancusi's Golden Bird sculpture, shown in the 1927 Arts Club exhibition, led to the writing of a text, a script for a magic trick of sorts, formulated in the early hours of the morning following a transatlantic flight to Minneapolis, a jet-lagged fever dream of an idea, an institutional provocation fashioned in my hotel bedroom just before dawn. What I scribbled in my notebook went something like this. Two teams of conservators in two museums in Chicago and Minneapolis, 400 miles apart as the crow flies, condition check, photograph, and deinstall two editions of the same polished bronze sculpture perched on a small carved stone base, an abstract streamlined form suggestive of a bird, Constantine Brancusi's Golden Bird, 1919. The conservators rigorously record their observations of the material condition of the two works, fill out the necessary paperwork, and ready the artworks for shipping. Once packed in carefully constructed and precisely monitored shipping crates, each appropriately marked with the livery of their respective institutions, the two twin sculptures are simultaneously picked up by two teams of art shippers and driven under the supervision of two museum couriers to their respective local airports. Once there, the crates are loaded onto two aeroplanes. At a carefully orchestrated moment, the pilots, twins perhaps, of these two propeller-driven planes carrying these precious twin cargoes, two metal birds inside two metal birds, gently cajole their charges into the sky and head towards each other, finding a similar, if contrary, flight path and settling at the same altitude as they move towards each other at equal speeds, one heading southeast, the other northwest. On this perfect equilibrium of a journey, at exactly halfway between one museum and the other, somewhere above Bosstown, Boaz, or Marshall, the planes pass each other, just close enough for the twin pilots to acknowledge each other visually, just far enough apart to avoid a collision. The in-crate monitors might, at that moment, register the slightest of bumps, a glitch caused by the turbulence of this symbiotic flyby. At that precise moment, that split second, neither sculpture is here or there, neither arriving at or leaving from, both arriving at and leaving from, neither nor, either or, and thus both are momentarily dematerialized. The two golden birds, two divinities of the air, are instantaneously freed, as Brancusi might have dreamed, from their material selves, from their earthbound life as stuff. In a moment of mutual institutional annihilation, they are simultaneously matter and antimatter at what might be understood as the essential moment of abstraction. Once back on terra firma, the same teams of art handlers who have been patiently waiting for the double of what just left them to land receive the alternatively created birds and ferry them back along the roads they drove earlier to the similarly expectant conservators who, in the direct reversal of what they did just that morning, install, photograph, and condition check the two reciprocal temporary loans. The day ends just as it began, with two golden birds in two museums, 400 miles apart, as the crow flies. While the exhibition I had traveled to Minneapolis to work on never actually happened, dematerializing with the curator who invited me, a work did emerge from that jet-lagged fever dream. Two black and white photographs made in collaboration with Emil Ron Anderson, my conjurer's assistant, my sorcerer's apprentice, and his beloved D.K. 179913, a photographic apparatus, or technical arrangement, as he likes to call it, a teleportation device, as I imagined it, a machine capable of writing images into space around objects during prolonged photographic exposures, and thus displacing or recontextualizing those objects. Think of a ghostly Picasso bull drawn into space for a camera with a skittish light source, paired perhaps with a cathode ray tube from an old-fashioned TV, and a 360-degree camera, the Visorama Lumiere, developed by the Lumiere brothers in 1900, and you're getting somewhere close. What Emile's technical arrangement, DK179913, allowed us to do, following an intricate set of journeys crisscrossing the Midwest, was to produce 2 black and white photographs that, like the text I just read, stands as a virtual manifestation of this interinstitutional exchange. So it's a sort of a visual way of teleporting one object from one place to the other without actually moving it. In the New York gallery, the text with additional drop-down footnotes linking 2 birds, no birds, which is the name of the work, to the other works exhibited in the exhibition, ran right the way around the space, like a picture rail from which to hang the exhibition. Accompanying this key photographic work were a number of other works that think about material histories and what I have called the geography of making. Carbon, Hagen to Essen, a charcoal-powered steam train journey commemorating the 100th anniversary of Europe's oldest museum of contemporary art, moving from the Folkwang Museum, moving from Hagen to Essen. In a 1920s steam train, DB 78468, which is, of course, presented here in the exhibition as a model. Following the production of 7 cubic meters of timber cut in Hagen, transformed into charcoal and fed to the boiler to power the train between Hagen and Essen. The endless cubic meter, ultramarine, a modified Pedersen bicycle that carved out a square meter of, a cubic meter of urban space on a speculative journey from one cube-shaped public sculpture to another. From Tony Rosenthal's Alamo, aka the Astor Place Cube from 1967, to Isamu Noguchi's Red Cube, 1968. Recursive plates, still life with apples and conkers, or silver iodine molecule model. Images, as the title suggests, of a diagram of a silver iodine molecule built from apples, silver, and conkers, iodine, the chemical compounds present on the surface of a daguerreotype plate on which the images float, ghost-like. And finally, the film work made in Berlin originally for an exhibition in Japan, Gauge, 400 feet of abandoned railway track, 400 feet of extruded silver, 400 feet of film, shown here as a scrolling sequence of film frames on an elongated monitor. A sequence edited in camera at the time of shooting on a single roll of 35mm film, which was accompanied by an extruded 5-kilo silver ingot that was used in the film to measure the railway track. A 35mm black and white film, also silver-based, and 5 kilos of railway track. So I'm going to just finish this part of the presentation with showing you that film gauge, which is in this presentation it's just a single frame at a time, so you won't see it quite as you did in the exhibition. But where is it? Gauge. Here we are. Again, the music for the film is by Joshua Abrams. Thank you.